It is my pleasure to welcome on to Avry Sports Show from the 55-yard line blog on yahoosports.ca, Mr. Andrew Bucholtz. Andrew, how are you doing today, man?
Pretty good. Thanks a lot for having me.
Of course, most definitely. I know you are one of the big authorities in the CFL. You love covering this league. I know you were down in Regina for the Grey Cup. And I gotta ask you, man, I know people are saying that it was very cold. Was it exaggerated somewhat? Was it really as cold as people thought it was this past weekend, Andrew?
Yeah, it was chilly, especially during practices during the week. There were some days where it went to about minus 40 when you factored in the wind chill. And there were some Tigercats players who picked up frostbite during the week of practices. What was impressive, though, was it actually warmed up quite a bit on game day Sunday. It was only about, right about freezing, and then the wind chill was only about -7 or so for most of the game. So it wasn't too bad conditions. The cold definitely was a factor, but it wasn't a crippling one.
The 101st Grey Cup, it was the first meeting of Hamilton and Saskatchewan since 1989. What was your thoughts on just the sheer dominance of Saskatchewan from start to finish, Andrew?
Yeah, they certainly did, and I mean that was something just about everybody picked the Rough Riders to win, but I don't think many of us expected it to be such a blowout. The thing was, in my mind, that really helped them was that they just won the trench battles, especially when they were on offense. Their offensive line just pulverized the Hamilton defensive front, and that cleared plenty of room for Kory. Kory Sheets' rushing performance was incredible. The guy broke a Grey Cup record that stretched back to 1956 for total rushing yards in a Grey Cup game. So that certainly says something about how good the Rough Riders were. There also were a lot of mistakes from the Tigercats, though, and some of those can be chalked up to the crowd, such as that mistimed snap. Some of them can, and maybe Henry Burris' interception too. Maybe the crew got on him and rattled him a little bit. There were other mistakes, especially when they were trying to make that comeback run, and all of a sudden the defensive stop, they're within 2 scores, and then they run into the punter, and that winds up dooming them. So I think it was partly about a lot of things that the Rough Riders did well, especially on the offensive line and in the ground game, but it also had to do with just some silly mental errors from the Tigercats.
No, there were definitely a few from Hamilton on Sunday. And no, we mentioned Kory Sheets. With Kory Sheets' performance in the Grey Cup, does this just intensify the running back battle in the league between him and John Cornish of the Stampeders?
Well, I think they're both very good running backs. I think in some ways they excel at different things. In my mind, Kory Sheets is a better guy if you're planning to just pound it up the middle, and if you're planning to have him carry the ball just over and over again and stuff it down their throats. But in my mind, Cornish is maybe the more explosive guy, a guy who can make a few more just massive runs. And what we saw that with that this year was that Sheets just received a ton of carries. He was very good with them, very effective with them, and he was able to stand up to that pounding for most of the year. Cornish didn't touch the ball nearly as much, and yet he still picked up a ton of yards thanks to his great yards per carry numbers. So I think you can go back and forth about which of these two guys is the better back. In my mind, they're both terrific running backs, and they're both great for their respective teams.
Oh, they definitely are. No, it was a very interesting year for the Hamilton Tigercats. I'm not sure many thought they'd be in the Grey Cup. This was a strange year because they were playing in Guelph, waiting for the new stadium, Tim Hortons Field, to be finished. And with the landscape of the Eastern Division changing, Montreal may not be the powerhouse, and this may be a Toronto and Hamilton division now. Do you think that this team can get back to the Grey Cup in 2014?
Oh, I think they certainly have a good shot. There's a lot of potential in that Hamilton offense, especially with their receiving core. What I'm really interested to see with the Tigercats is, A, how they improve their defense. I like their linebacking core, but I think they do need to do some work up front and in the secondary. And B, I'm curious to see if they're able to bring Henry Burris back as their quarterback, or if they want to. Burris is a very good fit in that offense for a lot of reasons. He's good at spreading the ball around. He's good at throwing a lot, but questionable decisions at times. He does throw more interceptions than maybe you want. So I'm interested to see if, and he's getting up there. I mean, the guy's in his late 30s now. So I'm interested to see if he isn't picked up in the expansion draft or by somebody else in free agency. And if that's the case, I think Hamilton will try to bring him back. But in my mind, it's going to be very interesting to see what they do there. If they go with Henry Burns as their starter again, that's really sort of a going all in. That's we think we're ready. Let's get to the Grey Cup again. Let's win it. If they don't, though, then maybe they go for a bit of a longer term plan. So I think what they do with Henry Burns is going to say a lot about their chances.
All right. And you mentioned longer term plan. Could the long term plan for the Tigercats see them giving the starting quarterback job to Dan Lefevre possibly?
Yeah, I think Dan Lefevre is a very interesting guy. He's a guy who did some great for them in just the sub packages this year, mostly running, but he also has a pretty impressive arm, which he showed off in the NCAA and which he's starting to show in the CFL. And I think he's going to be the guy they protect, their quarterback they protect in the Ottawa expansion draft, just because if they don't, there's a much greater chance that he'll be picked up than that Burris will. So I think that Lefevre, I'm not sure if he's a guy they'd want as their starter going into next year, but I do think he is very much in their future plans, and I think he's a guy they would like to have as a starter somewhere down the line.
I agree with you on that front. I know in this game, how surprising was to find out that Geroy Simon, a guy who's been in the league for over 10 years, had his first touchdown catch in the Grey Cup for the first time ever in Saskatchewan. Because, you would have figured that he would have gotten that earlier with the BC Lions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was a very good day for Geroy Simon, becoming the first Rough Rider to ever catch 2 touchdown passes in the same Grey Cup. And I think in a lot of ways it was a great way to finish the year for him. Simon obviously battled a lot of injuries this year. He took a bit lesser role at times in that offense, given all their other receiving talent. But he proved he's a guy who can still got something left. I think he can go out there and make some big plays and make some great catches. And he sounds very adamant that he's not retiring and that he'd like to be back in Saskatchewan. So we'll see what he can do next year if that's the case.
What were your thoughts on the halftime show? I know Hedley performed and there was the weird snowmobile that went off the ramp.
Yeah, the halftime show. That's quite something. Hedley isn't really my musical cup of tea, but they certainly did put on an impressive stage performance, and the snowmobile was definitely something.
I know coming up next on the CFL calendar is the expansion draft for the Ottawa Red Blacks. What are your thoughts, Andrew, on the league protecting the list of players who are protected and unprotected? Because that's one thing that the fans and media always want to know, and the league is taking heat for not revealing them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this was a big subject of discussion during Grey Cup week, and CFL Commissioner Bucholtz has a lot of flack over this. And essentially, I agree that it would definitely be a lot better from a media standpoint, from a fan standpoint, if we were able to completely know who teams are protecting and who they're not. That obviously motivates some interest, motivates some even more discussion about the expansion draft. With that said, though, I get why they're not doing that. Essentially, they're doing that because they don't want players to find out they were left unprotected, and then if they're not picked, to get in fights with their current teams and their current coaches over that. And apparently both the players and the coaches are very much in favor of not having those lists made public. So I understand why the league is trying to keep them. With that said, though, there are a lot of very good, very dogged reporters covering this league, and I would not be surprised to see a bunch of those names manage to make it out around the expansion draft, even without the league releasing it. I think it's going to be very interesting to see just how that expansion draft plays out, because I would bet you that at least some people are going to find out some people who are not selected are going to find out they were left unprotected, and it'll be interesting to see follow-up from that.
Oh, it's going to be very interesting to find out the fallout from that. Last question for you here, Andrew. I know the team that for years and years was known as the most prestigious in the CFL, the Edmonton Eskimos, they fired Kavis Reed, they bring in Chris Jones. I think it was a great move to bring him in. It was high time he got a head coaching gig. What are your thoughts on a guy who's so respected on the defensive side of the ball, getting his first head coaching gig here in Edmonton, Andrew?
Well, Chris Jones certainly has a lot of CFL experience. I think that's a very positive thing in a head coach. We've seen with some hires recently, such as, say, Dan Hawkins in Montreal, that it doesn't necessarily work to bring in a guy who doesn't know all that much about this league. Chris Jones has been a defensive coordinator in this league for 10 seasons with 3 different franchises, with Montreal, with Calgary, and then with Toronto. and he's built up a very impressive body of work. He definitely knows his defense, and the various personnel jobs he's held over the years give him a different perspective, and I'm sure he knows the game from that side as well. What I am wondering about with Jones, though, is if he can make the transition to head coach. We haven't always seen that from defensive coordinators. There are some of them who have done very well, like, say, Kory out in Saskatchewan. For all of that, I think guys like Rich Stubler, who had a very brief stint as the head coach of the Argonauts, so that didn't work out so well. Havis Reed, defensive coordinator before he got the Eskimos job, and while he had some success there, it obviously did not end well. Greg Marshall in Saskatchewan, obviously that wasn't the greatest coaching stint in the world.
Nope.
So, there are, Chris Jones has the qualifications you'd certainly like. He has qualifications that certainly will make him worthy of success as a head coach, but whether or not he'll succeed in that role is to be determined. The other thing I'm really curious to see how he handles is the media responsibilities of being a head coach. Chris Jones is a guy who's been very reluctant to talk to the media over the years, and particularly ahead of last year's Grey Cup in Toronto, where he was one of the key storylines thanks to going from Calgary to Toronto. He just refused interviews all week. Well, you can do that when you're an assistant. You can't really do that as a head coach. So I'm very curious to see how he handles that part of the job.
It certainly will be interesting to see how he handles things with the media. I want to thank you for coming on to Avry Sports Show today. It's been a blast talking to you, Andrew. Hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me.